Imagine being trapped, not for days, not for weeks, but for years. Your ship is frozen solid. Food is running out, the temperature keeps falling, and somewhere, out there in the endless Arctic darkness, something is hunting you. You don't know what it is. You only know, you're next. This is The Terror, a novel that transforms one of history's greatest Arctic disasters into one of the most unforgettable horror stories ever written. Today, we're exploring why Dan Simmons' masterpiece is far more than a survival story. It's a chilling meditation on fear, isolation, and the terrifying limits of human endurance. The story begins with a real historical event. In 1845, the British Royal Navy launched the Franklin expedition. 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Their mission was simple: find the Northwest Passage. Instead, they vanished. Every crew member disappeared. For decades, no one knew exactly what happened. That real mystery became the foundation for one of modern horror's greatest novels. Dan Simmons didn't invent the tragedy. He expanded it, using historical records, crew journals, letters, and documented events. He recreated the expedition with remarkable accuracy. Then he asked one terrifying question: what if the Arctic wasn't their only enemy? At the center of the story is Captain Francis Crozier, a capable leader, a brilliant navigator, and a man forced to make impossible decisions. As conditions worsen, Crozier must keep his crew alive. Even as hope slowly disappears, leadership becomes less about victory and more about survival. Most horror stories have haunted houses or monsters. The Terror has something even more frightening: nature. The Arctic is silent, endless, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to human life. Every freezing wind, every cracking sheet of ice, becomes another reminder that survival isn't guaranteed. As months pass, the crew becomes completely cut off from civilization. No rescue, no communication, no certainty that anyone even knows they're alive. Isolation begins changing people. Fear becomes paranoia. Friendship becomes suspicion. Hope becomes desperation. The real horror isn't just outside the ships. It's inside the minds of the men. Food disappears. Scurvy spreads. The cold never relents. Every decision becomes a choice between impossible options. How much of your humanity would you sacrifice if survival were your only goal? That's the question Dan Simmons quietly asks. Then, there's the creature, a mysterious predator stalking the frozen landscape. It appears without warning, kills with terrifying efficiency, and seems perfectly adapted to the Arctic wilderness. But here's the brilliant twist: the creature isn't the only monster in the story. Sometimes, human fear creates horrors of its own. Extreme isolation changes the brain. The crew begins questioning reality. Every shadow feels threatening. Every sound echoes through the frozen silence. Every mistake could mean death. The psychological horror grows stronger with every page. One of the novel's most powerful themes is indifference. The Arctic doesn't hate the crew. It simply doesn't care. Storms continue. Ice keeps moving. Winter refuses to end. Nature isn't evil. It's simply beyond human control. And that's far more frightening. At first, the crew survives because they trust one another. But hunger, fear, and uncertainty slowly erode that trust. Friendships fracture. Leadership is questioned. Desperation exposes people's true character. Extreme conditions don't create new personalities. They reveal the ones already hidden beneath the surface. Perhaps the most unsettling part of The Terror is knowing the expedition actually happened. The ships were real. The men were real. The suffering was real. Dan Simmons simply imagines what history could never explain. That blend of fact and fiction makes every chapter feel believable. Notice how rarely the novel relies on sudden scares. Instead, it builds dread: snow, silence, darkness, empty horizons, frozen ships trapped forever. Readers feel the fear long before anything attacks. That's masterful horror. If you're writing horror, study The Terror. Let your setting become an antagonist. Use real history to strengthen fiction. Build suspense through atmosphere. Explore psychology before violence. Show how extreme environments transform people. Remember, sometimes nature is the most terrifying monster of all. Years after publication, The Terror remains one of the finest examples of historical horror ever written. Not because of the creature, but because it reminds us that reality often contains enough terror on its own. The supernatural simply gives shape to fears that already exist. Perhaps The Terror isn't really about monsters. It's about survival, leadership, isolation, hope, and what happens when civilization disappears, leaving only human instinct behind. Because when the world grows cold enough, the greatest battle isn't against nature, it's against ourselves. Dan Simmons transformed one of history's greatest maritime mysteries into a haunting masterpiece of horror. By blending real events with unforgettable fiction, he created a story that feels terrifying, not because it's impossible, but because so much of it actually happened. Sometimes, the scariest stories aren't the ones we invent. They're the ones history leaves unfinished. If you enjoy literary analysis, historical horror, survival stories, and storytelling techniques from the world's greatest novels, subscribe, because the greatest horror stories don't simply ask, what if monsters were real? They ask something even more frightening. What if history was already terrifying enough?